All right, everybody, welcome back to Horn Takes, your Texas football and baseball talk destination. I am Sean Redfern. It is a Longhorn Friday. It is game day eve. The excitement level is building amongst both of these fan bases. The Georgia Bulldogs getting fired up. I know a lot of them are already probably down in Austin, barking at people on the side of the road, probably acting all weird. Texas fans getting fired up. We got a big day of tailgating Saturday. Going to be an absolute blast. We are heading down today. Cannot wait. We've been plugging Eric Henry of Horns 24/7, which, by the way, you'll see this in the segment, but I just always called it Horns 247, even though I knew it stood for 24/7. I'm slow, guys. I'm slow. But we'll have Eric Henry on in just a few minutes. Then we'll get into our four keys and a prediction for this Georgia game. Check us out on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Horn Takes. If you just like to listen to podcasts, we're on Apple Podcast, iHeart Podcast, Spotify Podcasts. If you can't find us on any of the places where people cast pods, you can go to horntakespodcast.buzzsprout.com on your internet device, your internet-enabled device, and find all the episodes. They all go up there. You can subscribe there. You can do everything you could do on any of these other platforms right there at horntakespodcast.buzzsprout.com. Folks, before we get into it, I want to apologize. I am battling a little bit of a cold. I got a couple days ago I started getting some really itchy throat, some runny nose, really allergy like. Now we've progressed to the stage where my nose is all stopped up. It's no longer running. And I cough a little bit, clear my throat a little bit. So if I do that today on the show, I apologize. It cannot be helped. If you've been watching the show for a couple of years now, since we've been doing it, you know about. It's usually a little later in the year, usually right around the beginning of December, then on through February. I'm a mess, man. Like I don't know what it is. I know they start doing cotton around here. They start harvesting cotton sometime around now, maybe a little later. And I don't know if that jacks me up or what. What they do is the excess cotton or dirty cotton. I'm not really sure why they do what they do, but they'll pile all this cotton into these big pits out on these farms and burn it. And so I think there's a lot of stuff that gets in the air that does not agree with my respiratory system whatsoever. So I stay pretty jammed up, pretty nasally for about 3 months every single year. So I apologize for that. It can't be helped. I've considered getting a head replacement, but the doctors don't advise it. We got an opportunity to sit down with Eric Henry of Horns 247 earlier this week and talk everything about this Texas team through 6 weeks. We talked a lot about Georgia and Texas. You guys stay with us. Check it out. I'm here with Eric Henry of Horns 247. Is it Horns 247 or Horns 24/7? I don't know that I've ever got the correct pronunciation of that.
You know what's funny is before I started working for 24/7, I used to always say it as 247. And I was made aware in the orientation we are 24/7 sports. So there you
Well,
go.
perfect. I'm glad I asked because that makes sense, but I don't know how you would show it any other way to make people understand that. I will start pronouncing that correctly because I've just always said Horns 247. But
Well, let
anyway,
me,
man,
I'll hit you with this one real quick, right? So when I moved out to Texas, I didn't realize that those dashes and HEB are there for a reason. So I called it Heb, right? And it's
fair
funny,
enough.
you just would look and you either read it one way. So I can empathize with you there on that one with the 24/7.
Well, we're all learning something new every day. Thanks for joining us, man. How's everything going?
All good, all good. Looking forward to Saturday night.
Yeah, man. Saturday night, I am excited about Saturday night. Speaking of Saturday night, let's get through some other stuff so we can start talking about Saturday night. So Texas 6-0 after a pretty sluggish start overall last Saturday in the Red River Shootout. They get a pretty impressive win, all things considered. What are your thoughts on this Texas team as we hit the halfway point in the season in 2024?
Quite frankly, I think this Texas team is playing excellent football. People want to say, oh, they haven't played anybody. People want to look at this Texas defense and say, oh, they're, allowing 6.3 points per game, first in the nation, but they haven't played anybody. Well, I'm a big believer. You play who's on your schedule. You can't control that, right? It's not their fault that the SEC didn't give them LSU, Georgia, LSU, Alabama, Ole Miss, Tennessee. They didn't, Mizzou, they didn't get those teams, right? But the teams they have played, taking care of business in damn convincing fashion, an average marginal win of over 32 points. That's impressive. You knock off 225, two top 25 ranked or top 20, actually, ranked opponents. That's impressive. They did it with, let's run down the injuries. A starting running back gets knocked out in camp. Your Heisman Trophy winning contending or Heisman Trophy contending quarterback gets knocked out. Arch Manning steps in. Offense plays well. So, yeah, in my mind, I am not someone, and people can say, oh, you're a homer, you cover the team. Fair enough. Like, whatever you want to say. But I don't think you can find a more impressive team in the nation right now than Texas. There are other teams that are undefeated, but just in terms of impressive wins and the way they've gone about their business, Texas, in my mind, is pretty
Yeah,
clear.
yeah, I think if you look at them today, you have to say they're playing the best football out of any team in the country right now. That can obviously change. Teams are going to get better.
Right.
Things are going to happen. We don't really know what the season is gonna, how it's going to unfold. I was talking about that uh, for a show the other day where, you have this perception of what teams are supposed to be going into the season, and then you kind of roll with those perceptions for the first few weeks as all these teams are playing each other, but you don't really know who are the really good teams, who are the teams that are pretenders versus contenders. And we're fixing to get to the point in the season now, and we've been doing it for a little bit in college football, but now we're really getting to the point where you're going to start separating the pretenders from the contenders. And I think a lot of the teams we thought were going to be really good maybe aren't going to be so good. And a lot of the teams that we thought maybe weren't going to be so good are showing out to be pretty good so far this season. You look at like Texas A&M. I don't think anybody expected them to be where they were right now, especially after that first week loss to Notre Dame. But they're 3-0 in the SEC. I mean, granted, they haven't played a lot of tough teams, but like you said, they're playing who's on the schedule. They're beating them pretty good, and they just tore Missouri just smooth up 2 Saturdays ago. That game was bad. If you're a Missouri fan, you got to be hating life on that one. I'm with you though on this Texas team. I think they're really solid. I think the thing that's most impressive to me so far is just how good that defense is, and how I thought they would be okay against the run. Like I certainly didn't think they were going to be last year's defense against the run, and they really haven't been, but they're not far off. And I feel like they just keep getting better and better every week in that aspect. As those younger guys get some more reps, they start actually playing technique and not just depending on the fact that they're outstanding athletes. They're going to be really tough once they all are right in the right mode and that run fit is where it needs to be. They're going to be a really really tough team to run against because athletically, I don't know that there's a better group of front seven or front six or whatever you want to call them today in college football. They're pretty tough.
Listen, I'm right there with you. And I'll start with the run defense. I entering this year, I said, hey, if this Texas run defense, if they allow 140, 135 yards per game, that still puts them top 50 in the nation. And if that pass defense gets better, they're going to be fine. What did I know? Because they decided no. I mean, while they're not at last year's mark of 82, 83 yards per game, they're not that far off it. Still right around that 100-yard mark, playing really strong run defense. The collective, let's just start with the defensive tackles, right? Vernon Broughton doing everything right from a defensive tackle perspective. The counting stats won't wow you, 15 tackles, 1 sack. But if you really get down and watch the film, you watch him playing the right gap, doing the right things, allowing for guys like Benda and Anthony Hill and now Leongo Lafau getting the start last week to clean up plays. Just playing really good football. And that guy's probably making himself some money as far as, potential next level picks. Alfred Collins has stepped in, still maybe not necessarily getting, quote unquote, that breakout season that you'd want to see from AC, but he's playing good. He's playing good football. I think he, in his own admission, would say he wants to rush the passer a little bit better, more consistently. So that's something. But let's look at those defensive tackles behind those guys. And here's the thing for me, right? Is Steve Sarkisian clearly knew that, and this is no, I'm not just calling out Tiasavea by name, it's just the circumstances in which this happened. They brought in Tiasavea prior to spring. They realized, hey, we need more bodies. Steve said it in his post game. He said, we need more big humans. We need more depth on the defensive line. Jere Bledsoe, Sadir Mitchell, the returners, clearly those guys weren't ready. So let's go out and get more guys. Bill Norton, Jermaine Lole, those guys have played their role to a T as pass rushers, as depth, as big humans on the defensive line. That's been big. You talk about some of those young guys, Colin Simmons. I mean, this dude, you can't help but as Marvel probably has one of the nation's best first steps in terms of a pass rusher. And by my account, my view, played the run really damn well last week against Oklahoma. That's what I spoke with Colin about post game. I was like, man, you're an excellent pass rusher, but you played the run really well. And if you ever get a chance to talk with Colin, he's an excellent interview. He's they haven't media trained him yet, so you're getting the real. You're getting what you would get out of a 18, 19-year-old. And he's like, man, you can't just rush the pass. You got to be able to stuff the run. And I think that's another facet of my game that I'm improving on. And I'll just quickly segue into the pass defense. That's exceeded my expectations like beyond what I could have imagined too. We know you look at the numbers last year, it was inflated, right? Because teams realized that you couldn't run against Sweat and Murphy, so you got to throw the ball, right? The Iowa State game is probably the most notable example of that, in which they threw the run game out the playbook early, and let Rocco Becht, who's having a great year for 6-0 or 5-1, Iowa State. They're playing
I
well,
think
but
I think they're undefeated.
yeah,
Or
I think they're 6-0, right?
yeah,
So, certainly they're having a good year, but Rocco Becht had in terms of the passing output, the yards, a good game last year. So that's why some of that yardage was inflated, but also they had to tackle better in the secondary. The move, I was dead wrong. The move to take Jade Barron and put him outside that boundary corner is paid off big time. In my defense, the only version of Jalen Gilbo I'd seen, because I joined the beat last year, was the version last year who wasn't 100%. So my thinking was, okay, if that's who Jalen Gilbo is, then I felt that Jade was much better served at star. You play Gavin Holmes at corner, and you improve the safeties. But what Steve realized is Ryan Watts was a really big factor in the run defense and the run fit last year. Jade Barron obviously loves to play the run and fundamentally sound. He improved. He's one of the more fundamentally sound players and is pretty darn good in pass coverage as well. He's the top rated defensive back on this team per Pro Football Focus. He shifts to the boundary. You get Gilbo at the star. That allows more versatility. Andrew Makuba playing really well. I'll give you one more name. Again, when I joined this beat, everyone was like, why is Michael Taft on the field? Why is Michael Taft getting these reps? And so they had me thinking, all right, this is just some walk on who's just like a team mascot kind of guy. No, Michael Taft is a really good safety. I mean, he's always looked athletic enough to my eye. You see him making great plays on the ball, great ball skills. So just a combination of all parts, and they're playing great defense right now.
you hit a lot of stuff that is interesting stuff. First of all, you talk about Michael Taft. We'll just talk about the pass defense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little inflated because people couldn't run against it. But the thing I don't think a lot of people realize that's really kind of obvious about defensive football. If you give the quarterback a lot of time to throw the football, it's a lot easier to find guys down the field and get them the ball. All these guys are outstandingly good physical type players, these QBs. What they don't all have is the ability to process all that so fast and get the ball out, get it out accurately. And that's where you see guys fail. This Texas team, the pass rush this year, just infinitely better, especially off the edge. If we had last year's pass rush up the middle and this year's pass rush on the edge, nobody could do anything. This team might not give up a touchdown all season. They that's just how dominating it was up the center last year and how good it's been on the outside this year. And up the middle this year is not bad. It's just what you would typically see. You just don't typically have guys like Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat that in a split second can get past somebody and be in the quarterback's lap. So I think the pass rush is helped that secondary massive amounts. You're right on with Jade Barron, and I was the same way. I was like, man, they're going to try to move him to cornerback. I just didn't see it. And all I saw was what he did in that Oklahoma State game, the Big 12 championship game. And I don't know if that was just indicative of him. He could have just had a bad day, but he got picked on a little bit in that game. And I'm sitting there going, they want to move this guy to say or to corner. Are we sure? Uh, but yeah, it's worked out great. Like you said, he's one of the highest rated defensive backs according to Pro Football Focus or whatever PFF stands for. But uh, And then Jalen Gilbo is another name. Yeah, Jalen Gilbo kept Jade Barron on the bench when they were both there earlier in their career until he got hurt. So, yeah, man, the defense. There's just tons of names, and you could just keep naming names on that defense just for 30 minutes of guys that can just come in and make plays. And again, that's what makes them so tough. It's not just it's not just a few guys on that defense that can excel and make plays. It is the entire every level of that defense has guys like that, and they've got guys in the two deep that are like that as well. And it just makes it tough to run offense against. I agree with your take on Colin Simmons against the run against Oklahoma. So much better than it's been all season long. And he's made a lot of plays in the run game, but you could just say, hey, you're dodging this block or you're dipping under this pull block. That's not going to always work. Somebody's going to catch you on that. You're making plays because you're an athlete, but you're not doing what you need to be doing. I thought he played it really well against Oklahoma, and I knew that was coming because you could see the progression each week. Like the more and more reps he got playing against the run and not being just in passing situations, he just kept getting a little bit better and a little bit better. That dude, I think Colin Simmons is probably going to be way better than any Texas fan like could have even possibly imagined when they signed him. So I'm really excited about him for sure. Um, we talked wide receivers the last time you were on. We
Yeah.
talked we previewed the wide receivers. We both talked about how there's a lot of names there, a lot of good athletes there. How's that group met your expect, or have they met them? Have they exceeded them? Let's talk about that wide receiver room a little bit.
Nah, I mean, that group has definitely met my expectations. And I would say if there were a player who's exceeded my expectations, it's hard to say that, Ryan Wingo, because here's the thing. When you saw him during spring, you watch enough football, it's like some people jump out to you and it's like they're ready. They got it. Wingo was that guy, even during spring. The only thing is like, all right, it's spring ball. Let's see how that translates to fall and whatnot. Everyone who tells me that, hey, this guy looks like the next coming of like a Roy Williams type, in terms of his body frame and his ability. And he's not the biggest dude, 6'1, 218. When I say not big, I'm talking about, that Megatron type, right? Remember when you
Mm-hmm.
just drafted like a Mike Evans? Sorry to invoke an A&M guy, but I'm from Tampa. I'm a Buck fan, right? So like, that 6'5, 220, 230 type guy. Wingo's 6'1, 218, but his catch radius is so long. It plays bigger than that. And when he gets the ball in his hands, he is a playmaker, breaking tackles, forcing missed tackles. So Wingo's exceeded my expectations. I'll give you a name. I know we talked about the receivers, and we kind of merged the tight ends there a little bit. Gunnar Helm's been my guy since day one, since I got on this beat. And even if you want to talk about exceeding expectations, his athleticism is, you know, it's weird, right? Because he played with JT Sanders, and anyone, if you play next to JT or playing, same position, you're not going to look like the greatest athlete because JT's a hell of an athlete. And even a guy like Amari Niblack, not getting a ton of run, but a great athlete.
Mm-hmm.
But Gunnar Helm, you see him hopping over guys, and not even just that, his fluidity in and out of routes. That was the thing. When I got on this beat, everyone told me Helm is the blocking back. He's a guy who just, when he's in the game, he's just like another offensive lineman. He's virtually a Malik Agbo type from last year, that role, right? Well, I saw him meet availability last year or practice availability last year. I'm like, he's not, Kyle Pitts, anything like that, but he doesn't look like a stiff out there. You fast forward a year later, just so fluid in and out of his routes. You can tell the confidence. And I love the quote from Gunner this week, Monday availability. He said, listen, George Kittle is his guy, but he said, I just go out there and tell myself I'm the best tight end in the nation. Like if I take that mentality out there onto the field, I whether or not I am is irrelevant, but I got to believe that I am that guy who's capable of making that plays. And you're seeing that confidence carry out and carry over onto Saturday. So he certainly has exceeded my expectations. But we can run through the rest of the guys. IB, Isaiah Bond. You knew he was a stud coming in from Bama. Certainly made plays. Silas Bolden, I do think he's been a bit of a victim of, quite frankly, came in during summer. It was hard to make up that time during summer and hit the ground running, especially when Jonte Cook had such a great camp. Wingo had such a great camp. Matt Golden, is having a good camp. And I did the Dogs 24/7 our preview, and I don't know why DeAndre Moore slipped my mind because you want to talk about the best overall receiver on this team, arguably. Moore will tell anyone. He's got that Cali swag to him. He's an Anaheim guy, but he'll tell anyone, I just followed Jordan Whittington. Like when I realized I wasn't going to be on the field a ton last year, I just followed Jordan Whittington around and asked him all the questions and what I need to do on the field. And that dude, whether it's hauling in two touchdown grabs, bit of a phantom hold in my opinion. The other week against Mississippi State, I thought that was a an iffy call, but blocking his behind off, you got to be impressed with this receiver room, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think DeAndre Moore has really impressed me because we just haven't seen him. We didn't see him last year. We didn't really start to see him until after the first couple games this year. I mean, I'm sure he got some playing time, but they weren't targeting him. He just wasn't getting a lot of run in the pass catching mode. And then all of a sudden he does, and you're like, man, I can see why that guy got recruited to come to the University of Texas and why so many people were high on him. I agree with the blocking piece. I think him and Ryan Wingo are the two best blockers on the outside by far. And stuff happens, the running game works down the field when those guys are in the game. And I think that's, you don't pay a big time receiver to block necessarily, but I think that's a big overlooked part of the game. If you can get guys that are willing to go block and they also can get down the field and make plays when they do have the ball in their hands, that just makes you that much better. It's like being a versatile baseball player. You talked about the versatility of this defense a little bit, and I think it's almost not fair what PK can just kind of do with all the pieces he has defensively. Uh, Talk to us a little bit about that, and what do you think we might see a little bit of against this Georgia team to sort of throw them a wrinkle?
You want to talk about someone who really deserves credit. PK is a throwback, right? When we were growing up watching football, back in the day, you had lifetime OCs, lifetime DCs. I grew up in Florida. Bobby Bowden wouldn't have had nearly the amount of success without a Mickey Andrews, who was guys like, listen, I don't want the headache of being a head coach. I want to be a DC for 30 something years and then I'll arrive to the sunset. PK is that guy. He is not looking for a head coaching job. He is happy being a defensive coordinator when he's certainly well compensated here at UT. And quite frankly, you talked about it. When you get a defensive team that has that type of depth, right, and go too deep at virtually every position, that allows you to get creative with the way you want to use guys. The switch I'll point to is last week, Leonard Lafau gets the start at Mike linebacker, someone who was viewed as the heir apparent to Jalen Ford last year, right? Well, now, and I'll be interested to see how this plays out because I kind of hinted at it early in the season that I wouldn't be stunned if Lafau made his way into the starting lineup around this time. God bless David Benda. David Benda is what you would draw up as a Longhorn. Pride, wants that UT degree. He has his limitations at times. And I think if you can get the ideal combination, linebacking combination, when you're going, your base package now, which is not three linebackers. Base nowadays in football is two linebackers and a nickel,
Mhm.
Lafau and Anthony Hill. That allows Hill to go off ball, rush the passer, have the type of week that he did last week against OU. And then you can put those situations where you have Hill, Colin Simmons. Um, I know this guy's not made a ton of plays yet, but he's still a capable pass rusher and Trey Moore. But also, Ethan Burke, right? Ethan Burke's length that is so crucial on the defensive line. And then we talk about the way you can mix and match. And how about this? I think this is an interesting storyline heading into Saturday with Derek Williams' injury. What do you do with the safeties? They've been committed to playing multiple safeties. Last year, they played 4 and 5. This year, they played primarily 4. It's been Derek Williams, Makuba, Taft, Jelani McDonald, right? Well, now you're down to 3. You're not going to see Filsamy. A lot. That's the popular name on our Horn 24/7 message boards. Quite frankly, if they wanted to burn Filsamy's red shirt, they could have done so because they've been winning games by such a wide margin. They could have burned his red shirt and got him in 4 games already. They're not. I don't see that happening. I see Jelani McDonald stepping up. I see JJR, Jordan Johnson Rubel, probably being the next guy. And Steve Sarkisian said that Jahdae Barron was the break, in case of emergency, break glass safety as the next guy. So I could see them mixing and matching him around. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on with that defense, no doubt.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what PK dreams up for this week because that certainly was a big play where they did split those guys out on either side. It's just got to be a nightmare for people. You just don't know when you have guys that can play so many different areas on the field, you just don't know where stuff is coming from. And so if the coaches don't know where it's coming from, the players don't know where it's coming from, it just turns everything into a big damn mess. And defensively, that's what you want to do. You want to make everything a big mess. Let's talk a little bit about this Georgia Texas game coming up. Georgia's back's up against the wall. A loss gives them two SEC losses, probably puts them in a position where they're probably out of the SEC championship picture. May, certainly not mathematically, but you got to figure there's going to be a lot of two-loss teams in the SEC. It's not a it's probably a crapshoot at that point that you get in. It kind of to me gives them no room for error down the rest of the games from a playoff perspective. I don't think a three-loss SEC team is getting into the playoffs. So I think for them it's kind of like do or die time. What should we expect? What should the college football world expect to see on Saturday night as number one Texas host number five Georgia?
You hit the nail on the head. A two-loss SEC team, yeah, there's room for that. Three-loss, that's a hard sell. Although, the top of the SEC, you could make the argument top five, top six teams probably beat most teams coming out of the Big 12 and wherever else you're going to get. I mean, I won't say Big 10. I'll leave Big 10 out of it, but Big 12, ACC, I'm still not sold on Miami just yet. I mean, they've gotten lucky twice this year, right? So could have had some couple losses. You can make the argument that any of those six teams would beat any of those teams, but to your point, yeah, you don't have much room for error if you're Georgia. In my mind, I think this is a game. I want to see if they can establish the run a little bit more. God help me if I say the wrong Etienne. Trevor Etienne. I've said Travis like six times. Trevor Etienne is certainly a talented back coming in from Florida. I want to see if they can establish the run. If for no other reason, you can't come to DKR at night and get yourself in unfavorable down and distance situations. You get behind the chains. You talked about this pass rush. It's just not there, right? Especially with Tate Ratledge already out on the offensive line, is a big piece of that. They got to get themselves in some manageable down and distance situations. Now, wide receiver wise, they're also down the kid from Miami. We know the situation with him being suspended. They don't necessarily have that elite type of playmaker that, for example, AD Mitchell. Someone just go win one on one at the top of your route, go get open. You don't necessarily see that from these guys this year. So then it falls on Carson Beck. And I've been on the record. I took some heat from the Georgia fan sites. They're like, how, Eric, could you say that Quentin Ewers is the best in the SEC? He hasn't been played in the SEC, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, all right, look, even if you think Beck is the best, we're not talking about a huge gap between
Right.
Quinn, Beck, Jackson Dart. So, like, let's flip a coin. Nevertheless, you see this year, Quinn Ewers certainly has played well. Beck has played well as well. Definitely, issue with the turnovers. I think whatever that was against Alabama that first half, right? We know what happened there, but nevertheless, this is a game I think you got to put on his shoulders because defensively, you're already down a couple guys as well. I'm expecting, and Steve Sarkisian was really complimentary. And anytime you have these three guys, you got to be complimentary. Kirby Smart, Glenn Schumann, Will Muschamp, right? Those are three great defensive minds. What can they do? If I were to say an X factor, is I'm wondering how can they pressure Quinn Ewers? Because I think if they can pressure Quinn, all bets are off. We saw Quinn a little bit of the happy feet, last week against Oklahoma. That's going to happen anytime you've been out of the lineup for a while. That's not necessarily a knock on Quinn. It just takes a while to get the rhythm back. But I'm curious to see if they do some exotic things because this is to your point again. What do you have to lose? You got to throw out the kitchen, throw out all the stops, throw out the kitchen sink and see what happens. So really interested to see what happens in this matchup. But again, if I were saying an X factor, really want to see how, they can pressure Quinn Ewers. And I want to see how Georgia, can establish the run early on, especially without Tate Ratledge.
Yeah, you look at these Georgia, just their numbers, and numbers don't always tell the story, but I think 6 games in, you can kind of get a little bit of a narrative about what a team is. They just to me don't look like the Georgia teams we're used to seeing. You mentioned the run game. They're not I think they average like 120 yards a
Yeah.
game on the ground, somewhere right around in there. It's not what you're used to seeing out of these big Georgia offensive lines, just bowling people over and making holes, putting three or four guys in the game the whole game and just running backs running wild. It's kind of what we're used to seeing with Georgia. And then defensively, they're not even close
Yeah.
statistically to what we're used to seeing with Georgia. Now that doesn't mean they're not still really good. They're certainly talented. They've been stacking talent there for years and years and years. So they got guys. They've got a good roster. You mentioned the injuries. You mentioned the suspensions. Not a lot sort of off the field or secondary to football has kind of gone their way this year in terms of keeping people healthy and keeping people out of trouble. I'm kind of with you. I think their path to victory really for me in this game is like you said, to try to establish the run somehow so you're not so one dimensional. You can kind of take some of the pressure off Carson Beck if you can have some success with the running game. And it doesn't even have to be wild success.
Right.
It's just got to be enough to keep PK and his staff sort of questioning what's coming. We don't really know what's going to happen in this situation. Get lucky a couple times when you shouldn't, and then wheels start turning in people's heads. What are they going to do now? What are they going to do next? That type of deal. So it doesn't have to be 200 or 300 yards on the ground for it to impact the game, in my opinion. And then defensively, I think you hit the nail right on the head, man. If they can get after Quinn and get Quinn sort of rattled, I don't think it's all quarterbacks. All quarterbacks are good when they've got time. We just
Yeah.
talked about that a few minutes ago. But Quinn, especially under pressure, sometimes can get kind of panicky. And I think if you can get a lot of consistent pressure on him, you get that in his head, and then he's just not the same guy decision wise the rest of the game. So it'll be really interesting to see if they can get any pressure on Quinn, and if that Texas offensive line can continue to hold serve, keep Quinn upright. That's obviously a huge important piece of what they do. What do you think Texas's path to victory is Saturday night?
It's funny, right? Because I asked Steve this question a couple weeks ago. I noted, I'm like, man, he's throwing a lot early in games, especially early, first drive, second drive. I think Texas' best path to victory, not only this game, but the rest of this year, this team plays well when they're ahead. And I know you listen to this and it's like, all right, what team doesn't? But because of the makeup of this team, it's almost impossible to come back on them if you get down 10-0, 14-0. The way the defense is playing, they're lights out, right? I want to see Texas come out, Quinn getting that rhythm, the same way he got in that rhythm against Michigan, the same way he got in a rhythm, early in games throughout the year. Use the pass to set up the run. I will say this again. Steve and I kind of go a little bit back and forth on this. Steve Sarkisian will look at a box score, specifically after the game. He'll do this and say, all right, 300 passing, 200 rushing. So why are you asking about the run game? All right, that's cool. And listen, by all means, with the way Texas is performing in the red zone, you break off chunk runs and they get you down in the red zone, you're right. My concern is anyone can do math, and I'm not a math major, but this is simple math. If I got 5 carries and I run once for 80 yards and I run 4 times for 2 yards, we all know what the majority of those yards were. I'm interested to see in this game how Contravion Wisner, Jaden Blue, who obviously had some issues with the fumbles against Mississippi State, right? Those consistent runs, just keeping the chains moving. Texas's formula has been we're going to throw first to establish a lead. Not necessarily short pass game, because if you look at the throws, it's more intermediate than it is short, right? But we're going to establish a lead and then lean on our run game. If they can get that formula going, I think they're golden. On the defensive side of the ball, again, it's pressure Carson Beck. Whether it's coverage sacks, because you saw Barron Sorrell's first sack. Barron kind of gave me a hard time. I was like, yeah, you got a little coverage sack, right? He's like, nah, man, that was me last week. But whether it's a coverage sack or whether it's beating your man off the ball, pressure him back. Because as you said, right, as much as I think in order for Georgia to win, they need to establish the run, it hasn't been great this year. They're going to lean on Beck heavily. So if you can pressure him, then you're golden.
Yeah, I think for me, I've kind of given up. I'm a run game guy. I really think it's important, and I think you have to be able to do it at certain times during the
Right.
game. And I
Right.
think we've seen Texas be pretty successful when Steve Sarkisian says we need to go run the ball, not when
Sure.
Sean Redfern says we need to go run the ball, or somebody else out there in Fanville says you need to be able to run the ball. They're pretty good at it when they do. But for me, I think getting those backs re-involved in the passing game. We haven't seen that in a while. I think to me that just stands in for the run game. You get the ball out quick to a running back on the outside in space. That's the old school, toss sweep that we all ran in junior high. Same type of concept. You're getting the guy the ball in space where he's best. So I think I'd like to see a little more of that. Yeah, football's easy, man. It really is. People try to make it rocket science. Win the line of scrimmage on both
Yep.
sides. Do what you want to do, and that's how you win football games 99% of the time. Too early to get a prediction out of you. By the way, this ain't going up till Friday, so if you're worried about that, I won't leak your info.
No, you're all good. No, I just gave one over on the dog side. This is one that I think you got to respect what Kirby Smart and Georgia are going to do. I think it's going to be a tightly contested first half. I genuinely do. The second half, I just think the better team pulls away. And I think Texas is the better team. I see this one somewhere around 31-21, 31, 17. It doesn't mean that Texas is necessarily 14 points better, right? Because it's 2 touchdowns, but they are the better team. And styles make fights. And right now, I don't think Georgia doesn't have really, I mean, on both sides of the ball, but especially offensively, enough to really test Texas defense with the way they've been playing.
Yeah, I think the depth will certainly show up in this game. I think the fact that it's at home at Darrell K. Royal is going to show up in this game. A lot of people don't realize it. This Texas fan base, and you've probably never been there. You probably haven't been there when it was quiet all the time. It was like a country club, no matter what was going on. This Texas fan base has changed, and CDC's done a great job changing the whole environment of that stadium. I think that place is going to be absolutely insane Saturday night. I can't wait to get there. It's going to be a blast. But I think you're right, man. I think the depth plays a big factor. And really, we just don't know what this Georgia team is. And I think it's a great opportunity for them to come in and show college football, hey, this is what we are. So I expect Georgia to be ready. I expect them to be prepared. I kind of share your same sentiments, like a close-ish type game in the first half, and then eventually depth just plays too much of a factor for Texas, and I think they'll kind of pull away. I'm not ready to do a score prediction yet, but that's pretty good. Where can people find more of Eric Henry and more about these Texas Longhorns from Eric Henry?
Absolutely. I'll run it down. Let's start. You can find me on Twitter at Eric C. Henry _. Of course, find the Texas coverage at horns247.com. If you're listening and you are in Central Texas, KView, ABC affiliate here, Sundays. Usually it's every other Sunday. I'll be with Corey Mose. Check me out at 5:30 Sundays. Usually we try to hit it right around halftime of that second game. So you can check us out in between the second game, Corey Mose and myself on KView, talking all things Texas football. And last but not least, Texas Sports Unfiltered. Monday through Friday, 12 to 1, do a daily show there. Just Google Texas Sports Unfiltered.
You guys check out Eric, man. He's got a lot of good writing skills, good content. I love following Eric on the Twitters and the X's, whatever they call it these days. Eric, thanks for joining us, man. Maybe we'll run across each other one of these days at one of these Texas games. I know you like to get to the stadium early and get settled in the press box and get ready to go, though. They don't allow me to go up there. But anyway, Eric, thanks for joining us today.
Anytime, my man.
Eric Henry of Horns 247, 24/7. I said I was going to fix it and I didn't even fix it. That's all right. It is what it is. You guys make sure to check out Eric. Follow him on X at Eric C. Henry _. Really good follow. You'll get a lot of good information. Even if you don't join Horns 24/7, you'll get a lot of teases. You'll get a lot of news out of those types of guys. So Eric Henry, always a pleasure to have him on, and we'll definitely bringing him back as soon as we get an opportunity. 4 keys and a prediction for this Georgia game Saturday night. Folks, this is a big game. Absolute big game on Saturday. We've talked about it a couple times this week. How there hasn't been Texas home game at night this big in a very long time. So it's going to be exciting. Georgia's backs firmly pressed against the wall. They're trying to keep pace as a one-loss team in the SEC. I think 2 losses for them means you got to be perfect the rest of the season and probably get some help to make it into the playoff. So really, they're fighting for their postseason lives Saturday night at Darrell K. Royal. So I expect those guys to be fired up. I expect them to be prepared. I think, Kirby Smart, this ain't his first rodeo. He's been there, he's done that. He knows exactly where his team is, and he will have that team ready to try to come into Texas, come into Austin, come into Darrell K. Royal, and get an upset over the number one Longhorns Saturday night. For Texas, it's an opportunity to stay undefeated. And to me, this one's really one of those program building type wins. We talk about program defining wins all the time. I think that win in Tuscaloosa last September was one of those sort of program defining, program building type wins. I think a win over number 5 Georgia on Saturday night puts you in a really good position to take that next step as a program. There are going to be 50 plus 4 and 5-star recruits in attendance at this game Saturday night in Austin. That means 50 guys, 4 and 5 stars will be visiting the University of Texas, some of them on officials, maybe all of them on officials. I'm not sure how the numbers work on official visits. But there's going to be a lot of outstanding football players from all over the country in attendance to this game. And if you're Texas, if you're either one of these teams, but especially if you're Texas, you get an opportunity to showcase your home facilities, your home crowd on a big time game on a Saturday night. You get an opportunity to sort of showcase your city to these guys in a different way. It's F1 weekend. The city's going to be buzzing like crazy just all over the place. Great opportunity for Texas to get a win over a top 5 team at home and really put their best foot forward for a lot of these recruits. So let's talk about what we think it takes for this Texas team to come out on top Saturday night. I think the biggest key, they need to start fast offensively. This one to me is sort of multifaceted. We've seen this Texas team struggle early in the last couple of games offensively. We've seen turnovers. We've seen them just not execute simple things. And I think to me, that's a trend that if you're Texas, you want to reverse. And to me, there's no better place to reverse a slow start offensively than at home against the number 5 team in the country. The adversity that Texas will face in this game early on from an offensive perspective, it'll be adversity that they allow. So they're in control. They don't have to worry about crowd noise. They don't have to worry about just the unknown. There's so much comfort to just being in a place that you know. And they know DKR. So I think that'll play to their advantage. Also, if you force Georgia to play catch up early in this game, I think you make them completely one dimensional. And when a team's one dimensional, that's just a lot less guesswork for the defensive staff. I mean, I think they can just start really teeing off with the pass rush. Carson Beck probably not going to hurt you with his legs that much. I'm not saying he couldn't get loose and pick you up some yards. He's probably very similar to Quinn Ewers in that respect. Not, not a statue by any means, but not what you would consider just a really mobile guy that's going to hurt you continuously throughout the game. So I think that's important. Getting a big lead can kind of set Georgia back on their heels and put them in a position where they don't really want to be, and then you can just keep building on that defensively. I think you start fast. The crowd has a lot to be excited about. I think an excited crowd on the road is really tough for the team that's on the road. Make it tougher for them to execute. Sort of, we talk about momentum all the time. Talk about how it's a thing, you can almost touch. It is so real, yet it's not, but it almost is. And I think when you've got the crowd in the game, just sort of being rabid and continuously rabid, that helps build that momentum and helps keep that momentum on your side. Number 2 key, they got to protect the football. Texas had 3 turnovers in the last 2 games. They had 2 fumbles and an interception, and they put the ball on the ground 3 times. They only lost 2 of them, but they put it on the ground 3 times. I think one of Georgia's sort of minimal paths to victory in this game is taking the ball away a lot. It's something they're just not good at this year. So if you're Texas, you don't want to let something that Georgia's not good at. You don't want to let a Georgia weakness become a factor in this game at all. You lose offensive series that way, basically they're stealing a series from you. And the more opportunities you give somebody, the more chance there is they're going to make you pay. I think Quinn Ewers needs to deliver. We see a confident Quinn Ewers that we saw in Tuscaloosa last year, that we saw up in Ann Arbor earlier this year. Did we see the skittish guy that throws off balance and makes inaccurate throws that we saw some in the Red River Shootout? I think if it's the latter, this game could easily go either way. And I think if it's the latter, I would probably lean towards Georgia winning this game. But if it's the former, I think Texas fans are going to have a hell of a night in Austin on Saturday night. Quinn has just got to do a few simple things. He's got to trust his protection. He's got to see the whole field. He's got to set his feet, and he's got to deliver an accurate ball. And if he'll do those 4 things consistently, he's going to have success. and the Texas offense is going to have success as well. Finally, I think Texas is going to have to answer the bell. I think there's going to be times during this game where Texas is going to face a lot of adversity. You rarely see a top 5 matchup where one team just completely dominates the other team. It just usually doesn't happen. And although this Georgia team may not be on paper and through the first 6 games of this season what we would expect from a Georgia team, I still think the Georgia program is the gold standard of college football for the last several years. Certainly one of them. I don't think they're going to roll over. I don't think they're going to come to Austin and just let Texas push them around in Darrell K. Royal. I think it's a talented team. I think they're going to make plays. And when they do, how Texas responds to that is going to be what decides this game. It's going to make a big difference in the outcome of this game. I think Texas's mental and emotional toughness is going to get tested a lot Saturday night. And that really hasn't happened too much this year to them. They've been tested physically and they've passed all those tests. But even in the games where the games were close, just in parts of games, I really don't think their mental and emotional toughness has been tested the way it's going to get tested Saturday night. My prediction for this game, number one, this thing is going to be a treat. I am so excited for this game. I, I think I think we're all in store for just a really good slugfest, and that's what I expect. You look at it, it's a battle of the 2 best quarterbacks in the SEC probably. We could debate it. We could argue about it. Let's just say they're 2 of the best for sure. And they're probably 2 of the best quarterbacks in the country. It's a battle between 2 really good coaching staffs, 2 really good rosters. I think this Texas team has several paths to victory in this game. We talked on the show last week about how there's just a lot of different ways that this Texas team can win. I think they can win a defensive game. I think they can win a shootout. Powerful enough on offense that they can score a lot of points really quick. The defense, stout enough to stay in the game, keep you in a game when the offense is struggling. And then I think they can do any combination in between. They're just a really complete team. Georgia to me, a little more limited. They don't have the great running game like we're used to seeing with Georgia teams. They don't really have the smothering defense like we're used to seeing with those really good Georgia teams. They've got some holes. I think Georgia's going to have to find some success on the ground to keep the Texas defense off balance. If they can't do that, if Georgia has to be one dimensional and you got Carson Beck throwing the ball 40, 50 times on Saturday night, I don't think they can win that style of football game against Texas. I think defensively, they're going to need to find a way to put a lot of consistent pressure on Quinn Ewers to really disrupt his game. I think whether we're talking about maybe some new coverage wrinkles that Texas won't expect, maybe bringing some pressure packages from places that they haven't shown this year. If Quinn Ewers is allowed to sit back there and get comfortable and stay comfortable, he will pick Georgia completely apart. And that's it. Like, I don't think there's any other way that Georgia can win this game than those two things. They're going to have to do one of those things really, really well, or both of those things pretty consistently for 4 quarters. If I'm Georgia, I'm doing 3 things defensively to disrupt Quinn Ewers. I'm bringing a lot of bodies close to the line of scrimmage on early downs because we know Quinn Ewers likes to throw those little screen passes. We know his game is short, intermediate to deep. Whatever it is, he's just not comfortable waiting long enough or taking those shots down the field. So I'm bringing a lot of bodies close to the line of scrimmage early and just kind of daring him to go do that. I think if I'm Georgia and I can get Texas in some long downs and distance, I'm playing 3 high safeties. We've seen it so many times in Quinn Ewers' career. His worst games have been against teams that play 3 high safeties. He just, whatever it is, he doesn't like the look. He gets hesitant. He gets panicky. I guess I'm not smart enough to know what it is. I just know it is. And then I'm dialing it up from all over the field. If you're Georgia, you don't have anything to lose. You lose this game, you let that guy sit back there and stay comfortable and pick you apart, and you lose this game, you're out of the playoff picture. Probably out of the SEC championship picture. And I know these are gambles. But again, I think it's do or die for Georgia. And I think if I'm going to die, I'm going to go down swinging. I'm going to throw everything I got at it. So it kind of begs the question, like, how ready is this Texas offense for things that they aren't expecting out of this Georgia defense? And how quickly can the Texas staff adjust to that? We already talked all week about this. I mean, I was on Nothing Finer pod last night with some Georgia guys. They were asking me about the atmosphere at Darrell K. Royal. I've been talking about the atmosphere at Darrell K. Royal. I think it's going to be rowdy, and it's going to make a difference in this game. It's not Death Valley, so LSU fans, please don't get on my nuts about how Death Valley's awesome. Nobody's claiming that Darrell K. Royal is as good or better than Death Valley. But Darrell K. Royal is very formidable for these big-time matchups. Here's how I think this game plays out. I think it's going to be close through the first half. I wouldn't be surprised if it was very low scoring through the first half. And then I just think the Texas depth and the halftime adjustments that they make to adjust to whatever Georgia throws at them that they weren't expecting are just too much for Georgia, and Texas starts to pull away in the second half. I think they pull away. I think Texas wins this game comfortably. 2-score win. I like Texas 30, Georgia 20 Saturday night. So lock it in. That's what we say. That is a wrap, folks, on Georgia Week. We are headed down to Austin. If you see us, come say hello. I'll be the big dude in a white cap. I'll have a huge Longhorn chain on. And I got a smoking hot wife. I'll have a few koozies to hand out. Horn Takes Podcast koozies. Stop by, ask me for a koozie. If I have one, I'll give it to you. Try to be back on Sunday with Drunk Sean Thoughts. Find us on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Horn Takes. Give us a subscribe. Give us a follow. Won't cost you guys a thing, but we sure appreciate the support. You can email me at horntakespodcast@gmail.com with all your questions, comments, concerns, and criticisms. I love them all. Let's get down to Austin. Let's get on these Georgia Bulldogs. Y'all get hooked.